The summer I turned 17, I'd been pitching for about a year. Somebody looked at me at one point and said, "Man, that kid can throw really hard. If we put him on a mound, I wonder what he can do." And so they did, and I threw really hard. But here's the catch. All I could really do was throw really hard. And somewhere along the lines, what happens when all you do is throw really hard is people start to realize it, and they just wait for a pitch to come that they can hit really hard. And so somebody pulled me aside and said, "Chris, what you need to learn to do is change speeds. You need to learn to throw a changeup." And I was like, "I just have to slow down my pitch? I can do this. I got this. I've seen people do it. I've seen the way it works. I know I've got the function of it all." And so the cleanup hitter, right? The number 4 hitter comes up, and I get 2 strikes on him, and I go, "I got this guy now. Watch this." And my catcher called for a fastball because that's all I threw, and I shook him off. And my catcher went, "No, here's a fastball." And I shook him off, and he went, "Oh, no." And I was like, "I'm going to get him." So I wind up. This is about the same speed as my wind-up. I wind up, and that's it. I threw my changeup, and it went 400 feet over the fence and across the street. See, I thought all I had to do was slow it all down, and I sat there in embarrassment as he rounded the bases, pointing at me and laughing, because I threw him the slowest pitch he had ever seen in his life. See, so often, though, we can be the same way with our faith. We can read, and we can know the stories, and we can hear all these things about God, and we can be like, "Well, I get him then. I just need to act out like that," without understanding what's the true nature of who he is. And it isn't until we understand the true nature of who God is that we can really live out our faith and understand what God's doing in our lives. And the interesting thing about Paul's gospel is Paul's gospel was written well after the first 3 gospels. In fact, it was written about the same time as a lot of Paul's writings were, and after some of them, in fact. So what we see from John is his approach to Jesus' life is a little bit different. He's seen the way that the church has started to function. He's seeing the in-battling. He's seeing people go, "I have grace. I don't need the law or truth anymore. I can just live this life as long as Jesus is in my life. Everything's okay. It doesn't matter what I do." And he's seen this other end that started to show up and say, no, we have to go back to the law because we keep messing up without the law, so we need the law, and Jesus and his grace can be an afterthought. And John takes a step back as he introduces his gospel, and he says, "But wait, guys, we need to remember who God is in his very nature." And these are the words that he writes in John 1, verses 14 through 18. He says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, 'This is the one I spoke about when I said, He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, and has made him known." See, John knew what was at the very heart of who Jesus was, this understanding of grace and truth. It's interesting the way he puts it, because it's not just that grace and truth came with Jesus, but note what he says. It says, "Out of fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given." John points out that grace was already there. When God provided the 10 Commandments to Moses and he set up the law was never there to restrain, it was there to provide grace. restoration, a place to connect with God again. And the people had manipulated it and twisted it. They had lost what the true nature of God was and who he really was in all of his fullness. See, understanding grace and truth is at the heart of John's message. And in these verses, he uses that word grace 4 times in 3 verses. Do you want to know how many other times he uses the word grace in the rest of his gospel? 0. He sets the foundation of who Jesus is, and then says, now let me tell you the story of how this works. Let me show you how his grace and his truth impact your life. See, when we look at grace, sometimes we can be misconstrued, have some strange definitions. So here's what we know about grace. Grace is an unmerited favor from God that is necessary for our salvation. We can't do it ourselves, right? That's why the law was placed to provide a path. That's why Jesus was provided, because nothing we do will ever restore what we were created to be. Ephesians 2:4-5 tells us that, but because of his love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ. Even when we were dead in transgression, it is by grace you have been saved. And truth, it's what is real. It's what reveals the state of man, our sin nature, and what informs and reveals the state of God. See, it sets the standards for how we act, how we see things. John is saying that these 2 ideas, the reality of who we are and the reality of who God is, must come together if we're ever going to be redeemed and restored to what we were created to be. As Erman Bavinck wrote, he put it this way, that the human being is not autonomous, but is always and everywhere bound to laws that were not devised by him, but that are prescribed to him by God as the rule of his life. They are the foundation not only of our knowing and knowing about things, but also of our willing and our acting. We can't manipulate the truth. The truth was there beforehand, and it's there setting boundaries for how we can act, know, and understand. And John had seen a manipulation of the truth already starting to happen in the church, and he says, let's bring it back to why we're really here. And why we're here is that the nature of Jesus rests in this idea of grace and truth. When we live life in grace and truth, we're forced to decide. When we live life in grace or truth, right? We lose the and, we put the or, because that's the easy thing to do as humans, right? When we do that, we get to decide what we need and what's important to us. We get to decide what we want in the moment and how we're best going to benefit. And a lot of times we may do it with the right intentions. We use it as a redirect. We live on this pendulum. Today, I'm feeling kind of restricted by the way that these rules feel in my life, and I just need freedom, and I'm going to be on this side. Well, then you spend a couple days here or a year or 2, and your life feels out of control because you have too much freedom, and you swing all the way over to this side because now I need restrictions, and I need rules, and I need truth to guide everything I do. That's our human factor. That's our sin nature telling us we swing back and forth on this pendulum, and John is saying, no, it rests here in the middle where grace and truth collide. See, when we operate in grace or truth, we're not able to achieve either one. We're always trying for something else. See, we know that who God is, when we know who God is before, take a step back, sorry. So John carefully shows us Jesus' efforts and who he is. And we get in this battle sometimes where we don't know who God is, and we try to manipulate him into this bubble of what we believe the grace or the truth element in it should be. And so John takes these stories from his gospel, and he says, let's show you what Jesus is really like. So a lot of times when we measure grace and truth in our life, maybe the easiest way to do it is we can do it on what we call the grace and truth matrix. So this grace and truth matrix puts us into 4 categories, right? The first category is, we live a life very low on grace and truth, right? We don't think about it. I don't want to. It's easier if I just live my life. I let you live your life. We just kind of float through things, right? This is a world of ignorance and apathy. My dad used to say, the biggest problem in the world is ignorance and apathy. You know what I say to that? I don't know and I don't care. Right? It's this element of just walking through life. If you don't think about it, you don't have to worry about it. It doesn't involve you. But then we get in these categories where sometimes we live in this place where grace is low in our lives, but truth is high. We like rules. We need structure. We want everything to act just like it's supposed to act because it's easier. And when we're in those elements, what we really live in this state of control, this state of oppression. It's so much easier if I know what I'm supposed to do every element of the day. A to-do list. Today I prayed. I tithed. I saw that old lady. She needed to walk across the street. I held her hand and we walked. But the heart of what you're doing is always just trying to fulfill something that you're never going to fulfill. Right? And then there's other times in our lives when we go, I just need to be freed from all the burdens of the truth, all the burdens of the rules, all the burdens of the law. And so we end up in this place with high grace and low truth. And when we're there, we're in this place of appeasement, enablement. We never question what you're doing. It's okay what you're doing. Right? You believe in Jesus? Nice. Good job. Everything's going to be okay then. You don't have to act. You don't have to do anything else as long as you believe. We're okay. Seems funny, but often we end up in that place, right? Or so often, normally we end up in that place because we're sitting there going, I don't want to deal with the true harshness of my life. And I just matter if I let you be you, I can be me, and we can live happy. Right? But then we have this place where Jesus operates, and that's this high grace, high truth place, and that's a place of restoration and hope. The funny thing is, when we're operating in this enable and appease or oppression and control, we're actually trying to get to restoration and hope. We just don't know how to do it because we're broken. And so what John tells us in his stories is he says, hey, and as we live in these places, Jesus offers the ability to restoration and hope. And one of the first places we see this is in John 4. In John 4, we meet a Samaritan woman on her way to a well. And probably the most interesting thing we find out is that she's doing this in the middle of the day. See, you wouldn't approach the well at the middle of the day. It's hot. It's a lot of work to do as the sun's beating down on you. You wanted to go early in the morning. Get your water before the day starts. Do it in a comfortable temperature. But this woman had been living in this world where she feels oppression, she feels control. Her life had been beaten down by laws and rules. She's living in this lower quadrant. And as Jesus approaches her, he asks her a simple question. He says, "Woman, can you fetch me a drink?" Simple, right? Simple for most of us. But see, this woman had been living restricted by rules, telling her what she could do and what she couldn't do. And what we later find out is those same rules are just holding her down because now she's scared to even see people because they're going to judge her for every behavior that she has. And she looks at Jesus and she responds in a rule-based manner. She says, "You're a Jew, and I'm a Samaritan, why would you even talk to me? Why would you talk to me? Don't you know that as a Jew, you're not supposed to talk to me? I don't exist. And I'd rather not exist. Don't you know who I am? And Jesus replies, and he looks at her and says, I know exactly who you are, and if you knew who I was, you'd be asking me for a drink. Because the drink that I give you is a drink of life. And again, she responds straight out of that area of oppression and control, and she says, give me this drink, where do I find it? Where do I find it? Because don't you know how hard it is for me to get to this well every single day? Because every day I get to this well, I have to pray that nobody is going to be here and that nobody is going to judge me and nobody's going to hold me accountable for the life I'm living. And Jesus asks a very strange question at that point. And he goes, woman, where's your husband? Opens the door to truth. He hears her inner turmoil and opens the door to truth, to allow her to release this burden that's been weighing on her. And she doesn't do it at first, right? She says, I don't have a husband. A lie that she's no doubt told over and over again. And Jesus looks at her and he answers her and says, you're right. You've had 5. And the man you're with right now isn't even your husband. He could have looked at her and he could have said, you're right. All you've done is break the law. You're not worthy to be here. Get out of my sight. All these things that she's heard from everybody else in her life. And his statement is simply, you're right. That's not your situation. This is your situation. And there's something about that. That willingness to not judge her in the moment, but just open up this element of truth that makes her inquisitive, makes her question who he is. And she makes a statement at this point that often we can overlook. And she looks at him and says, you must be a prophet. It's a word that no doubt we've read so many times in the Bible, but in this instance, we truly have to understand where she's coming from, because as a Samaritan woman, they only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible. They only followed that Pentateuch. So to them, there was one prophet, Moses. And one day there would come another, the Tahib, the restorer, the one who would bring peace and restoration to all that was broken. And she looks at him and says, you must be a prophet. And then she questions him in a way to really invite what's going on. And she says, the Jews say I have to worship in the temple, but we used to worship at this mountain. What do we do? And Jesus says, you know what? The Jews are right. We provided them the rules, but the day will come. The day will come where it doesn't matter. Because where you worship isn't the point. It's who you worship and how you worship. It's the point. And her reply is an affirmative. She says, yes, I know one day that Messiah will come. And when he comes, he will give me the answers. And his words are simple. And there's only 2 of them. I am. I am the answer. I am the Tahib. I am the restorer. I'm the one inviting your peace. And what does she do in this moment? This moment that could have broken her, the moment she had to realize an answer to who she was and all that she had done, this moment excites her and invites her to worship, because her next step is to go. She leaves her jar behind. She doesn't need the water anymore. What she needs now is to go and tell these people that she's been avoiding her entire life that Tahib has arrived. She runs to these people who had no doubt would have looked at her with affliction and looked at her in that lens of oppression and control and said, what is this woman talking to me about? And she runs to them and says, guess what? You've got to come see this man who told me everything I've ever done. You ever been there? You've held on to something so tight, and you've created so many rules and so many lies in your life, and all you want is that one person to come along and just release it and tell you that's what's real, and so you can be like, yes, it is. And Jesus did it. He said, here's the truth. And she responds, and she says, come see this guy. Could he be that Messiah? When we allow Jesus into our lives, those lives that are ruled by control and oppression, those lives that are ruled by high truth and low grace are impacted and changed because Jesus restores. Right? But it's just not those people who are impacted, because we see in chapter 5 a man who's on the other end of the spectrum. He's been disabled for 28 years. He's broken. He's sitting at a spring just hoping to get in because, see, there's this superstition that if you can get into the spring first, you can be healed of any problem that you have. So he's been sitting there trying to get in, just looking at everybody else. And all he wants is a little bit of grace in his life. He's like, I just need somebody to see me and provide for me. I just need grace. I could care less about everything else. Just give. And Jesus comes along and he asks him a very poignant question. He says, do you want to get well? Note those words. He doesn't say, do you want to be healed? He doesn't say, do you want to walk? This man doesn't want to deal with the physical and the normal stuff. He just wants to be healed. And Jesus says, no, but do you want to be well? Do you want to be fully well? And the guy says, well, I'm trying. If that is not the most human response to a God word, I don't know what is. How many times in our lives have we felt God pushing us to do something, and you look at God and go, God, I'm trying. And he goes, no, just let me do it. No, I'm trying. God, I can do this on my own. Don't worry. I know it's a simple task. I can just do this. And he's like, no. Because what you're asking for is so much deeper and grander than you could ever imagine if you allow me to do it. Because the next thing that happens is so amazing, because Jesus looks at him and he's like, yeah, you're trying. Now quit trying. He says, rise up. Right? Look at verses 8 and 9. Jesus is not simple. He's not like, hey, everything's good. I know you've been trying. Let's, try and roll over, see if you can stand up. I think you got this. No. Jesus' statement is to the point. Note the exclamation point. Rise up. Pick up your mat and walk. And at once, the man was cured. See what cured him? It wasn't the man. The man who's, I'm trying, I'm doing everything I can. It wasn't him. What cured him? Jesus' words. Because at the statement, at that point, Jesus says to do it, and the man's cured. Can you imagine what that must have been like? 38 years, you're sitting on a mat, and you're trying to figure out how to do things. You haven't used your legs, right? If I'm sitting down for an hour, my legs feel a little wobbly. 38 years? And what's this guy do? Stands up. Starts walking. What he was asking for was so much greater. And he was trying to do something on his own that was never going to be achieved. Right? He wanted just a little bit of grace. And Jesus said, no. For true healing and restoration, it must be grace and truth. And we see this impact in this guy's life because he walks away, and what's the first thing that happens? These Pharisees approach him, and they say, why are you carrying your mat? Nobody wonders about this guy who's been on a mat for 38 years. Nobody says, wait, what happened to you? How, you healed? No, they look at him, why are you carrying your mat? These rules start to creep in, and he's like, the guy who told me to stand up, he said to carry my mat. I don't know. And what's their first question? Well, then who told you to stand up? Who told you to do this? And the guy just goes, I have no idea. I have no idea. I just know he did it. And where's the first place he goes? Is a place where he's probably never been allowed to go before. He goes to the temple. Because he doesn't know that it was God that healed him, but he knows that the only one that can do that is God. And he goes to the temple. And Jesus sees him there. And his words are so great. See, you're well. You're not healed. You're well. Go and sin no more. Don't allow the restrictions that have been in your life to creep back in. See, we do that as humans. That's that pendulum thing, right? Everything's great in my life. I'm well. Everything's going good. And we just turn a blind eye to everything else. And slowly it starts to creep in, and then we got to swing the pendulum again. And Jesus says, no, you don't. See, because grace and truth, when they're provided together, they bring restoration and hope. We're not called to add grace to truth, right? A little bit of grace. It's not salt and pepper, people, right? It's not seasoning. Grace and truth is everything, right? You don't add a little grace to truth or a little truth to grace. It's an entire cultural shift. It's a response. See, for the Samaritan woman, she was so moved by the restoration she felt in her life that she went face to face with the same people she had been avoiding for years. It didn't matter to her what they thought because she knew who she was. And she knew that everybody else needed to feel this. This restoration and hope that Jesus provided was so much more than anything else could ever be. For the disabled man, he was willing just to get up and to walk. You know, we're not told that when the Pharisees confronted him, he didn't drop his mat and go, I'm sorry. Forgive me. No. He just looked at him and said, the guy told me to take it. And I'm going to follow. I have no doubt when Jesus looked at him in that temple and said, see, you're well. Now go and sin no more. He knew exactly where he was going. And his focus was completely changed. He had been restored, and he had hope. It's about life change, not a situational change. You know, Jesus didn't shy away from the truth, right? He didn't shy away from inadequacies of people, and, you know, he still doesn't. He shows us his fullness of grace and truth, and his nature is revealed in us. In us. Because you see, the hope and restoration that we receive is just a byproduct of a greater thing, because grace and truth reveal God. They reveal God. When the Samaritan woman acted, she revealed God. When the disabled man walked, he revealed God. When we allow ourselves to live in the grace and truth of who God is, we reveal him to a world that's hopeless and waiting. See, John 1:18 reminds us, no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. When grace and truth are combined, the shift moves beyond the individual to glorify God. And Jesus calls this out in one of the last miracles that he does during his public ministry. In chapter 11 of John, we're told that Jesus learns that his friend Lazarus has died. And he looks at his disciples and he says, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. We're going to go wake him up. And the disciples, not understanding what he's saying, was like, why are we waking up Lazarus? What? And Jesus follows up the words and he says this, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. Why? So you may believe. So that when I get there, I may glorify my Father, that you may see the power that he's given to me, that you may see the words that hear the words that he's provided, and that your lives may be changed. And then he gets there, right? He's going to provide this restoration and hope to Lazarus' family and to Lazarus. And he gets there and he says, move the stone away from the tomb. And Martha still looks at him. And he says, Jesus, he's going to stink. Jesus, don't you know that there's rules and laws in this world? We got to abide by those things. And what does Jesus say to her? Did I tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And as the stone was pulled away, his prayer is recorded by John. And Jesus says these words. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. This hope and restoration, so great for us, but it's just a byproduct of God's glory being revealed to the world. Bobbin continued his thoughts on this idea of Christian worldview and grace and truth, and he said this. He said, to conform ourselves to that life in intellect and heart, or maybe we can reverse those words, in truth and in grace, in thinking and in acting, this is to be conformed to God's Son most profoundly. Let's hear those words again. To conform ourselves to that life in intellect and heart, truth and grace, in thinking and acting, this is to be conformed to God's Son most profoundly. Our lives are changed when we allow him to change it. But even more than that, when this happens, God's revealed to a world that's so in need of hope and restoration, and he's revealed to them through us. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much. Can't even imagine. There are times when the words can't do justice. Because I know that all I'm doing in my words, Lord, is just trying to come to grips with what you've done in my life and what you do and are willing to do in each of our lives. And if I'm honest, I wrestle with this idea of grace and truth, and I'm so overwhelmed by it, and I try to control it in my life, Lord, and right here and right now I release it to you. Because you are the only one who can use it appropriately. Because you're full of it. It's all that you are. And you allow it to overflow onto us. And Lord, I pray that we can each take that grace and truth and share it with those in our lives, with the community that we live in. Let us be beacons of who you are. Let our lives be examples of the restoration and hope that only you provide, so that when we're asked, we can say, the restorer has come. And you should see him too. Pray this in your name. Amen.